Whew. Well, hello, people. Welcome back to 90 and Out. I'm your host, Timothy Holt, and this is the What is the Bible podcast right here on Rumble and YouTube. And this series is all about what is the Bible? What is this collection of writings? We focus on the composition and compilation known as the Christian Bible on this podcast. This particular episode, we are going to be looking at the letters of Paul, or written by Paul. There are 13 of them that we're going to be discussing in two sections, big sections, but also we'll get into some of the nuance. Did Paul really write these letters? That kind of thing. So, if you want to know more about the life of Paul, you should check out our previous podcast episode on the book of Acts. It's the only history book in the New Testament, and a good chunk of it centers around the life of this guy named Paul, also known as Saul of Tarsus. So check out that. You can also check out the rest of the playlist in the link in the description. So without further ado, let's get right into it and talk about the Pauline letters, also known as epistles. And cue the music. Well, all right. So, first of all, before we dive into the composition and collection of these letters, we need to ask ourselves, who was this guy named Paul, also known as Saul of Tarsus? Well, back then, just like today, we have people with more than one name. My name is Timothy, but it's also Lee. It's also Holt. All right, so just like back then, we have people known by different names today, and they did then too. Saul of Tarsus is also known as Paul. He had a Greek and a Hebrew name. We get more details on some of his life by reading these letters. He brings out life application from his experience, but also in the book of Acts. So if you go to Acts chapter 6, you're going to read something fascinating about this guy named Saul of Tarsus. So let's go there right now. Acts chapter 7, verse 58. There is some commotion going on, and a guy named Stephen is about ready to have a rock concert in his honor. And feel free and read the entire context. That's 6 through 8, chapters 6 through 8 for that. But we're not focused on Stephen here. We're focused on Paul. So, verse 58. And cast him out of the city, that's referring to Stephen, and stoned him, and the witnesses laid down their clothes at a young man's feet, whose name was Saul. Now, tradition tells us that Saul was not just a young man there, he was one of the instigators, and the reason why these people laid down their cloaks with Saul was because they're about ready to get bloody, and they didn't want blood on them. And Saul's pretty much spurring them on, right? Now, if you fast forward, skip over to chapter 9, you're going to read about Paul at the road of Damascus. He's on his way to Damascus to imprison and beat Christians up. He's on orders of the high priest to do so. He's pretty zealous about his job and also really good at it. You think this might cause some issues later? Yeah, it does. But by the time we get to chapter 13, he is fully on board with being a Christian, serving Jesus Christ, and being an ambassador for him. The rest of the book of Acts pretty much covers his life, for the most part, up until about 62 AD. And Paul dies by execution somewhere between 62 and 64 AD, Anno Domini. So that is a rough overview of the life of Paul, and the reason that is interesting is because we also need to understand he was well educated. He was a student of Gamaliel, who was a prominent Pharisee at the time, had his own theological school. Paul was not a novice or stupid by any means. He was very well educated and highly intelligent. He debated people on Mars Hill with the philosophers of his day. And that's why he spearheads these letters. Some of these letters are to churches he founded himself. He tells one church, you are my witnesses. You are my witnesses. Why are you arguing over my credentials when you are my children in the faith? I brought you in. Right? So he addresses these letters. They're not written to non-Christians. They're not written to non-believers. They're not written to general populations of regions and cities. They're written to Christians. And when reading the letters, keep that in mind. He's talking to people who profess Christ. So like when he writes to the Corinthians, the Christians in Corinth, and tells them, hey, that guy who's having an open affair with his stepmom, you should totally kick him out. That is gross and wrong and abhorrent. These people claim to be Christians. Little sidebar note here. If you aren't attending a church because you think there's heresy going on, or they're a bunch of hypocrites, or whatever, read some of Paul's letters. He doesn't say abandon the faith. He doesn't say leave the church. He says stand and take corrective action. So, we're not talking about theology in this class, in this podcast. We're talking about composition and compilation. Why are these letters here? Well, one, they give us great insight into the first century Christian communities. They give us a lot of insight to it in that Acts only covers us, mostly focuses on what Peter's doing and co. There's James first, then Peter, and then there's Paul and Silas and Barnabas and company. Where these letters give us more insight on what actually is going on with the church organizations. They are general epistles. They're church epistles. Now, with that, let's get into the section where we talk about them in three basic groups. So the two big groups are church epistles or letters. They're written to churches, groups of Christians, and then there's personal letters written to individuals. Now, out of the four personal letters, one of them is definitely Paul. It's agreed that Paul wrote this letter. There is almost no argumentation against Paul's authorship, and that is Philemon. Philemon is very short, and it is poignant. It's about a runaway slave named Onesimus, and Philemon is the owner, and Paul is petitioning Philemon to welcome Onesimus back as a son and not a runaway slave. It's a very good read, and it's overtly against slavery. Yeah. Keep in mind, he's writing this in the Roman Empire that absolutely had slavery. So, the other three personal letters are 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy and Titus. Now, why is there a debate? I don't know. I personally think the argument that they are Pauline is pretty weak sauce. Because I read where he asks Timothy to bring him his cloak and his favorite scrolls so he can read them while he's cold in prison and alone. He also puts in other tidbits of personal information like, hey, Timothy, that stomach issue you have, you should probably have a glass of wine every night with dinner to help with that stomach issue. Like, they are so not theologically sound at all. And they just, to me, read very personal. Like, I know you, you know me, we're friends, we're more than colleagues. He addresses Timothy as his son in the faith. Now, it is possible that Timothy wrote these letters on behalf of Paul. Like, Paul wrote them to Timothy, and then Timothy later recounted that these two letters and then wrote them down for posterity's sake. That is possible. I would find that more plausible than just, hey, somebody 100 years later wrote them. I think that's hogwash because they're too detailed. They're too personal. Timothy is an adopted son of Paul. Now, either just in the faith, meaning he brought Timothy into Christianity, but it could also be that he has adopted him as his son legally or relationally speaking. And the letters definitely give that feel of a father figure writing to his son. Titus is similar to that. It's not as close, but it like relationship wise, but it definitely gives that aura of a mentor to a mentee. And they're both pastors. They're both bishops overseeing a local congregation, a fairly large one, with Timothy being in Ephesus, arguably one of the largest, if not the largest Christian communities at the time. So, excuse me. So I personally find the argument against Pauline authorship to be extremely weak sauce. Yeah. And I've thought that way since I can remember. That just reading them, especially in light of the other letters that we know are Paul's, they just come off as being written by Paul to Timothy and to Titus. Philemon is handedly written by Paul. There is no discussion on Pauline authorship because it states right in it, I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand. So it's kind of hard to argue that it's not Paul. Okay. There's other details too, internally and externally. Even early church fathers unanimously credited Paul with it. All right, so then one letter is most likely not written by Paul. It's most likely written by students of Paul. It's definitely from the Pauline school of thought and theology, but probably not Paul. This is pretty universally agreed upon that Paul did not write it, but it definitely comes from the Pauline school of thought and philosophy. So his students, his disciples. And that is Hebrews. Hebrews is written very differently, contextually speaking, than the other letters. And that's why it is at the last, the bottom of the list. It's the last one. And works as a bridge between the Pauline letters and the other general letters. So that would be Peter and John and James. Okay. So you might be going, okay, well, you skipped over a bunch of them. When I go to Acts, the next book is not Timothy, First Timothy. It's not Philemon. It's this Romans book. Well, yeah, that's because I skipped those for intentionally. So Romans is not the first letter written time-wise, but it is the longest of the letters, and it's the most theologically in depth and salvation-centered of the letters. There is a common evangelistic technique known as the Romans Road to Salvation, where there are several different scriptures in Romans that point to conversion to Christianity. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. That's in Romans. The wages of sin is death. That's in Romans. The gift of life is salvation in Christ Jesus. That's in Romans. Okay? And salvation is for all people. That's in Romans. All right? So with that, that's why Romans is so easy. Because it's so just lush with theology, right? And it's certainly Paul. So we have Galatians in chronological order, general chronological order. Galatians, which is written to the region of Galatia. First Thessalonians, which is written to the Christians in Thessalonica. First Corinthians, Second Corinthians, written to the Christians in Corinth, where Paul founded the Christian community there. Romans, Paul was not a founder of the Roman church. He arrived and found Christians already there and went, great, yay! Um, woo! Right? And I would imagine I would be excited too. Um, and Philippians, which is written to the Christians in Philippi. Now, those are the letters that are certainly Paul's, mainly because they start out with Paul, an apostle, Paul, a disciple of Jesus, Paul, writing to you in, right? Like, you know, well, let's just go to Romans right now. It's really hard to mistake the authorship of the letter to the Romans when it starts out like this. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God, which he had promised afore by his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, concerning his Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh. Really hard to argue that Paul did not write it. Also, it's just written in this fashion. Now, did Paul write these letters alone? No. Just like we discussed with Luke and Acts, Paul was not alone. He used scribes. We know he used scribes because some of them are named in the letters themselves. I'm so-and-so, a scribe writing to you, greetings, that kind of thing. So we know he used scribes. We also know that Paul did not write by himself because some of these letters also have co-authors listed right at the beginning with him, like the second letter to Corinth. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God, and Timothy, our brother, unto the church of God, which is at Corinth, with all the saints which are in all Achaia. So clearly Paul and Timothy co-wrote this, but Paul spearheads it. Paul's the leader. He's spearheading it. And by the way, again, going back to 1st and 2nd Timothy, if Timothy is a co-author of one of these letters, why would we not be surprised if Timothy and Paul have written correspondences to each other? Like, duh, right? And then there's 3 letters that are also up in the air. The scholarly consensus is pretty divided, and that's Second Thessalonians, Colossians, and Ephesians. Now, again, I think the arguments against Pauline authorship is pretty weak sauce, but you decide. One of the arguments is that the word usage is different and the structure is different, but you know what? How much of that is the scribe writing it down? They're also generally listed later in Paul's life, and we know that Paul had been stoned, he had been shipwrecked, he had been several attempts on his life, he had personal injuries. That's one reason why Philemon, with him writing, I'm writing this with my own hand, is so impactful, because we know from his life that he couldn't write well. So, working in the medical profession, we have dictation a lot. And a lot of times when somebody is dictating what somebody else is writing, they'll add their own wordage. Okay, they'll add their own wordage in there where it's the same message, but it's worded differently than they actually said it, simply because of that translation between what we say and what we hear, right? They follow suit with the other letters in as far as like the body of work is concerned. Like 2nd Thessalonians picks up where 1st Thessalonians left off. You can see there's a little bit of a time gap between the two, just like there is in 1st Corinthians and 2nd Corinthians. Colossians does not cover anything that's not covered in any of the other letters. You'll also see a repeat here if you're reading through the entire canon of Scripture. There's a lot of rinse and repeat. There's a lot of, hey, we've covered this before, did you forget? because we need reminders. So let me know your thoughts. I'm in full agreement with the scholarly consensus on Hebrews not being written by Paul, but definitely being written by the school of Paul, Pauline school of thought and theology, his disciples, either first or second generation. The rest of the letters, I think, are most certainly Paul's. Does this matter? Yes. Yes, I think it does matter. That we can debate these things, and we should have understanding. And one of the main reasons for this podcast is just that kind of understanding. Otherwise, picking up the Bible, especially if you are new to Christianity or haven't really read the Bible because it's pretty intimidating, having some general understanding of where to start and how it's compiled, I think is very helpful. So the next podcast, we're going to be looking at the other general letters written by Peter, James, and John. So stay tuned for that. Let's hit the outro and go from there. All right. Well, thank you for watching. If you are still watching, hit the comments. Say hi, say something. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. It's not a super in-depth video on these letters. There's so much that can be said about the Pauline letters. Many have dedicated immense amount of time to. This video was not meant to be exhaustive by any means, but just an overview of their compilation and why we have them in our Christian canon. Paul is very influential on the theology of Christ and the foundations of Christianity. So if you like this video, like it, share it, do all that social media stuff. Check out the shop button if you're on Rumble, and I would love to hear from you. So comment. And with that, may God bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and give you peace. I'm Timothy Holt with 90 and Out, and we're out.